Fake HOA cops stormed Jack Merritt's yard, demanding access to his ordinary-looking shed, unaware it was a covert CIA listening post. Hired by corrupt board members, the imposters brazenly tried to force entry, risking a federal breach. But Jack's quiet call to Langley unleashed real agents who turned the tables in minutes. Just wait until you hear how this stunning showdown ended and why justice came down hard. Jack Merritt had been through enough neighborhood nonsense to recognize the rhythm of a bad morning. The sharp, insistent banging on his backyard gate wasn't unfamiliar. In this neighborhood, governed by a notoriously overzealous HOA, complaints had a way of arriving uninvited. He set down his coffee, took a calming breath, and stepped out into the warm Virginia morning. But what he saw made the breath catch in his throat. 3 men stood by the gate, clad in black tactical vests labeled in bold white letters, HOA Enforcement Unit. Their presence was wrong in every sense. There was no such official team, no such uniforms, no sanctioned authority of that kind within any HOA guidelines Jack had ever encountered. The man in front was built like a brick wall, his bulk stretching the seams of his vest. A cheap radio hung from his shoulder strap. He held up a laminated card, a laughable imitation of an official ID, and delivered his message in a clipped, rehearsed tone. You are in violation of HOA Code 9.14, unauthorized storage structures. You are hereby ordered to open the shed. If you do not comply, we will cut the lock and proceed. Jack stared at him, outwardly calm, though his pulse hammered in his ears. The shed, a simple gray structure at the edge of his property. To anyone passing by, it was just that. Unremarkable, unimportant. But beneath its ordinary appearance lay one of the more sensitive operational nodes on the eastern seaboard, a covert communications relay maintained under deep federal cover. On paper, the building was leased to a non-existent logistics firm. In practice, it served the Central Intelligence Agency, monitoring signals linked to high-priority foreign intelligence targets. Jack was its embedded civilian operator, living under assumed credentials in the neighborhood to maintain its integrity and discretion. No one was supposed to know. The existence of the shed had been approved through layers of legal and federal channels protected under national security exemptions that the average HOA board could never begin to access, nor comprehend. For 6 quiet years, Jack had kept it that way. His job was to be invisible, normal. A polite man in his early 40s with a penchant for grilling and walking his Labrador at sunset. Nothing more, until now. He measured the men carefully. They didn't carry the weight or discipline of trained federal officers. Their vests were mismatched, their equipment surplus and haphazard. The badge the leader flashed was a generic plastic laminate, no federal seal, no official issuer. Which meant one thing: these men were not who they claimed to be. Trying to keep the steel out of his voice, Jack asked the only question that mattered. Do you have a legal warrant? The leader grinned, a smug, dismissive expression that instantly grated. The HOA is the authority here. We don't need a warrant. Open it. At that moment, the situation crystallized in Jack's mind. This wasn't about an HOA code violation. It wasn't about storage structures or aesthetics. This was an orchestrated move. Someone had sent these men. Someone had either suspected or accidentally stumbled onto something they didn't understand. And now they were trying to force their way in. Whether out of greed, paranoia, or simple recklessness, Jack didn't know yet. But one thing was certain. If they succeeded, the fallout could be catastrophic. And as he stood in the rising heat of the morning sun, one thought burned through the static in his mind. I have to stop this. Now. The men advanced through the gate, ignoring Jack's measured protests as if they were an afterthought. Their heavy boots crunched across the grass, leaving careless marks that made it clear. They saw this as their ground now. Jack kept his stance calm, but his mind was racing. These were not HOA board members. He had attended every quarterly meeting, quiet, anonymous in the back, and never once had he seen these faces. Whoever they were, they had no legal standing, yet here they were, moving with brazen entitlement toward one of the most sensitive federal installations in the region, and they were doing it for an audience. Across the street, a small knot of neighbors had gathered, lured by the spectacle of armed HOA enforcement barging onto a suburban lawn. Phones were raised. Cameras rolled. Jack caught one familiar face, an older neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, watching with visible unease. He met her eyes for a fraction of a second. No words passed, but the message was clear. This isn't right. One of the intruders, a lean, twitchy man with a smug expression, glanced back toward the onlookers. Then he noticed Jack's clenched jaw, the tight control in his posture. The man smiled, a deliberate slow curl of the lips, the kind meant to mock. Jack's pulse spiked. These weren't just hired muscle, they were arrogant, reckless. They thought this was some kind of game. But what they didn't grasp was that their actions risked triggering a classified counter-response, and perhaps worse, drawing public attention to an operation not meant to exist. Jack's anger built beneath his steady exterior. Their badges were laughable, plastic, clearly printed at home or by some shady local outfit. Their vests were a mismatched collection of surplus tactical gear. Their movements, practiced but sloppy. They weren't trained federal agents or even proper security contractors. Jack began to see the shape of it. Someone had hired them to snoop. Probably a board member who'd grown curious about the inconspicuous gray shed no one had ever been allowed near. Rumors had likely spread, the usual neighborhood chatter about secret tech or illegal surveillance. And now, some fool with money and connections had sent these men in under the thin cover of a fake HOA authority. But they had no idea what they were meddling with. One of them, shorter, wiry, impatient, suddenly produced a pair of industrial bolt cutters from his bag and approached the shed. He set the cutters on the lock, hands poised. "Last chance," he sneered over his shoulder. Jack's vision narrowed. He could no longer afford to play the polite suburban resident. Calling local police would take too long and might not prevent a breach. If they compromised the door, the automated countermeasures inside the shed could trigger a wider alert. Or worse. He exhaled slowly, forcing clarity through the rising heat of anger. It was time to escalate, fast and precisely. Without another word, Jack turned on his heel and walked swiftly back into his house, locking the door behind him. He knew exactly what number to call. Jack shut the front door with a firm click and turned the deadbolt. Through the window he heard jeers from the intruders. "Call who you want. We're not leaving." The words barely registered. Jack moved swiftly through the living room to a small, innocuous wooden cabinet. Inside, behind a row of old paperbacks, sat a compact black satellite phone, its signal routed directly through secure federal channels. He retrieved it with steady hands and activated the encrypted line. Years of training guided his voice. No panic, no wasted words. Merit, breach attempt, non-federal actors, active tampering risk, immediate response required. There was a pause, a fraction of a second, then a clear, precise voice on the other end. "Copy. Hold position. Reinforcements en route. Maintain containment." Jack ended the call and exhaled slowly. The anger that had simmered moments ago now crystallized into purpose. He returned to the front window, watching. Outside, the fake officers had advanced again to dine in. The man with the bolt cutters had started on the shed's lock, metal bit against metal in sharp, deliberate grinds. Another leaned into the doorframe, wedging a pry bar beneath the reinforced seal. They worked with sloppy aggression, completely unaware of the line they were crossing. Jack's jaw tightened. They were on the verge of triggering an automated security cascade. If they breached the inner threshold, sensitive assets could be exposed. He glanced at his watch. Reinforcements would arrive fast. A sudden hum of engines drew his attention down the street. Two unmarked black SUVs rounded the corner at speed, coming to a precise stop just outside Jack's property line. Doors opened in unison. 5 agents emerged. Tactical gear, controlled movements, weapons holstered but ready. Their presence radiated quiet, unquestionable authority. At their head was Special Agent Dana Crowley, tall, composed, eyes sharp beneath a plain ball cap. She moved forward with deliberate calm. Jack allowed himself a breath of relief. Now the situation would be handled properly. Dana approached the cluster of fake officers, her voice clear and commanding. "Federal agents, you are unlawfully attempting to breach a restricted federal site. Drop your tools, hands where I can see them." The leader of the fake unit froze mid-motion, bolt cutter still in hand. His mouth worked, trying to summon bluster. "We're HOA enforcers." Dana's tone cut through the lie like a blade. "No, you're not. You're impersonating law enforcement and attempting unlawful entry into a federal installation. You are under arrest." For a beat, silence hung in the air. Then, the color drained from their faces. Gone was the smirking arrogance. In its place, raw fear, as the reality of their situation came crashing down. Jack watched from the window, the fire in his chest settling into grim satisfaction. They had no idea what they had walked into, but they would now pay the price. Jack stepped out onto his porch as the scene unfolded. The fake HOA enforcers now stood in a line, their hands cuffed behind them, their bravado gone. Federal agents methodically read them their rights, voices calm, precise. Across the street, the gathering of neighbors had grown. Many held their phones aloft, capturing the moment. For a neighborhood long accustomed to petty HOA disputes, this was something entirely different and deeply satisfying. One voice rang out clearly through the summer air. "Knew they weren't real." A ripple of applause followed, uncoordinated but genuine. The arrogance these men had displayed moments ago had been replaced by very real consequences. Jack remained quiet, observing. His role in this was nearly finished, but part of him wanted to see the process through. A short while later, as agents secured the scene and the arrested men were loaded into waiting vehicles, Special Agent Dana Crowley approached Jack. "We've pieced it together," she said. "They're part of a local rogue outfit calling themselves Neighborhood Compliance Patrol. Not recognized by any legitimate agency, operated under contract for certain members of your HOA board, specifically your HOA president." She handed Jack a thin folder. Inside were preliminary findings, a paper trail of illegal payments, unauthorized surveillance orders, and a disturbing number of false enforcement actions conducted across multiple communities. "They thought your shed was some kind of unauthorized surveillance hub. You can imagine. Their guess wasn't far off, but they had no understanding of what they were tampering with, or how dangerous that move was." Jack gave a small nod, keeping his expression neutral. The wider investigation moved swiftly in the days that followed. Federal charges were filed against the HOA president, who had authorized the illegal raid, now facing accusations ranging from conspiracy to impersonation of law enforcement. The so-called compliance team faced multiple felony counts, including unlawful entry, impersonation, and attempted breach of a secured federal site. As for the shed, it remained untouched. Within 48 hours, additional reinforcements arrived, enhancing the site's physical and electronic protections even further. From that point forward, it was designated under new protocols, limiting even Jack's own access. The message was clear: no further tolerance for amateur interference. For Jack, the incident marked the end of his cover in this community. Quietly, the agency processed his reassignment. Within 3 weeks, he was preparing to leave. The operation would continue under a new, more discreet framework. Before he departed, a single sealed envelope arrived at his temporary office. Inside, a formal commendation recognizing his judgment under pressure and his role in preventing a potential national breach. Jack packed the last of his belongings with practiced efficiency. As he took one final look at the quiet suburban street, a wry thought crossed his mind, words that would stay with him long after he left. Let this be a warning to anyone who thinks HOA cops can kick in any door they please. Sometimes the door they choose fights back.